Okay, this video is about writing equations, so we have the bottom two and the back side of your review. Okay, so we have 4 parts. We want to write a sine equation, it says, with a period of 4 pi. So with a period, we always have to calculate the b value. Okay, remember there are 4 parts to your equation. There's your amplitude, there's your trig part, and then we have the b value, then we have your phase shift, which is c, and then you have your vertical shift, which is d. So we always have to calculate the b value based upon your period. So b is 2 pi, always 2 pi divided by the given period. So 2 pi divided by 4 pi. Okay, the pi's cancel out, and 2 divided by 4 reduces to 1/2. Okay, so there's your vertical shift of up 2 units. That's the d part. And then the amplitude of 4, well, that's your a part. So now we have enough to write our equation. Y equals 4 times the sine of 1/2 x, right? So there's your b value, 1/2 x, and then plus 2, that's your d to move your graph up 2 units. Okay, if you want to, you can put the 1/2 x completely in parentheses, but it is not necessary to do that. Okay, so let's practice again with number 5. This wants a cosine graph with a period of 2. So that means our b value is 2 pi divided by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, so our b value is just pi. Okay, here is your phase shift, and then this is your vertical shift. Nope, that's an amplitude of 2, so no vertical shift in this case. So y equals 2 from your amplitude times the cosine of pi, parentheses, x plus 3, right? Because your parentheses always lie. If you're moving left, that means you have a plus 3 in parentheses. So notice where the b value is if you have a phase shift. The b value is outside of your parentheses if you have a phase shift. And if you don't have a phase shift, it can go inside of your parentheses with x. Okay, so it's important to put it in the right spot, because it means something different if you have pi inside of your parentheses. So just remember that. Okay, our next 3 want 2 equations. It wants a sine equation and it wants a cosine equation for each graph. Okay, one will be natural and the other one will have a phase shift. Okay, so we got to think, which is a natural? It's number 6. Is this a natural sine or a natural cosine graph? Because it starts at the origin and goes up, it is a natural positive sine graph. Okay, so we have to find all of our things about your sine graph. Okay, the amplitude of this graph is 4, right, from the middle to the top. So the midline goes through your x-axis, which means there's no vertical shifting. The period of this graph is 1 complete cycle. So it looks like this has 1 complete cycle in, what does our tick mark say? 4 pi. So we have a period of 4 pi. Okay, which means we have a b value of 2 pi over 4 pi, which is 1/2. So naturally this would be a sine graph, so we can write simply y equals amplitude of 4. So 4 sine of 1/2 x. Right, no phase shift, no vertical shift, so that is as easy as it gets. It is a natural sine graph, so 4 times the sine of 1/2 x. So in order to write a cosine graph, the amplitude does not change. the period does not change. The only thing that does change is your phase shift. So for our cosine, we want to move our maximum value back to the origin where it's supposed to be. So the question is, how far has it been moved? So let's look at what the value of one tick mark is. Okay, so this one says 4 pi. The middle is 2 pi. So this first blue tick mark is going to be pi. So our graph has a phase shift of pi units to the right. This point here is pi units to the right of where it normally is. It's supposed to be here on the y-axis, but it is pi units to the right. So that's our phase shift, pi units to the right. So when we write our cosine graph, the amplitude stays the same, the b value stays the same. So still y equals 4 cosine of 1/2. Now we put our x minus pi in parentheses, right? Because what direction do we need to move your maximum point to get back to the origin? You need to move it left, which is why we have a minus. Left is a minus direction. We have to move our point left in order to get back to where it's supposed to be. So there are your two equations, right? One is a sine equation without a phase shift, and the other one is a cosine equation with a phase shift. Okay, so that will happen with all of these. Number 2, is this a natural sine or a natural cosine graph? Because it starts at a maximum on your y-axis, this is a natural cosine graph. So in other words, we're going to have a cosine equation without a phase shift. So let's figure out what the amplitude is. Well, hopefully you can tell the amplitude is 2, right? Because it's from your midline up 2 units. Okay, if this tick mark we're going to call pi, that means it has a complete cycle at 2 pi, right? A complete cycle for cosine is from a max to another max. So this has a period of 2 pi. And if it has a period of 2 pi, that means we have a b value of 1, right? Because 2 pi is your standard period for cosine. And no phase shift, no vertical shift, so this equation's pretty easy. Y equals 2 cosine x. Right? You don't have to put a 1 in front of your x, but if you really want to, fine, put a 1, but nobody ever does that. So now let's look at our unnatural or your cosine or your sine graph. Your sine graph starts at a point that's going to go up. So this is our natural sine graph. Right? So how far has this point been moved away from your origin? Your sine graph is supposed to start at the origin. So if this blue tick mark is pi, that means our next tick mark is pi over 2. So our sine graph has a phase shift of left pi over 2 units. Right? We have to decide, based upon the labeling of your x-axis, what does one tick mark represent? And in this case, it represents pi over 2 units. So when we write our sine graph, nothing changes. 2 sine of 1, so we don't need to put a 1 outside of your parentheses, but x plus pi over 2. Because we need to move our origin point right pi over 2 units to get back to where it's supposed to be, which is why this is a plus, because you have to move it to the right to get it back to where it's supposed to be. So here are your 2 graphs, right? Your natural cosine graph does not have a phase shift, and your unnatural sine graph does have a phase shift. Okay? All right, last example. Here we have, well, the question is, what graph is this most natural for? Notice that it crosses your midline at the y-axis, but it goes down. Okay? So this would be most natural as a negative sine graph. A positive sine graph would start at the origin and go up, but because our graph goes down, that makes this most natural as a negative sine graph. So let's do some analysis. This has an amplitude of 2. Okay, it has a vertical shift of up 2 units. Right, notice that your tick mark is 4, which means the middle of 4 and 0 is 2. So 2 units up. It has a period. So from 0 all the way around to the next 0 for sine. That looks like it has a period of 2 pi over 3s. Right, your single tick mark is pi over 3. And from the left, that's 0. There's 1 pi over 3. 2 pi over 3s is the period, which means we have a b value of 3, of course, because it's 2 pi over b. And for our negative sign, there's going to be no phase shift. So our most natural equation, y equals -2, because 2 is the amplitude, -2 sine of 3x, right? And if you want to put that in parentheses, we can, but you don't have to. And then plus 2 represents your vertical shift of up 2 units. So now let's look at our cosine graph, right? The other one. So cosine has been moved to this point, right? That's its maximum. The cosine graph has been moved to the left of its normal position. So the question is, how far has it been moved? Well, if one tick mark is pi over 3, that means half of pi over 3 is pi over 6, right? So the denominator doubles if you want to half something. So our phase shift has been pi over 6 units to the left. We've been moved to the left pi over 6 units. So that's going to change when we write our cosine graph. It's going to be a positive cosine graph. So y equals 2 cosine of 3, right? Because there's a phase shift. Your b value goes outside of your parentheses. X plus pi over 6. Because we have to move our maximum point to the right to get it back to where it's supposed to be. So a plus pi over 6 as your phase shift, and then up 2, so a plus 2 after your parentheses. Okay, so when you're given a graph, there are 4 correct answers. Positive cosine, positive sine, negative cosine, negative sine. Right? One makes the most sense based upon your picture, and the other 3 are all phase shifts from your given picture. Okay, so be able to do all 4 of those on any given graph. Okay, you're doing wonderful. Have a great day. Goodbye.